Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
You've been on holiday?
No, I haven't been on holiday. I have been for a couple of days in Spain.
Working?
Yes, seeing museums and films and recharging my intellectual batteries.
Sounds like a holiday.
And then I was in London working, actually.
Yeah.
And then I was on the jury of Q Weekender, the Northampton Queer Film Festival.
Tell us about that. How did that go?
That was excellent, actually. I mean, the selection of films was really incredible. So it was very difficult to choose a winner. My favorite of the films was this Vietnamese film called Song Lang, which is about a kind of an enforcer for a moneylender who falls in love with an opera singer.
Opera singer?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, so there's this popular type of narrative opera, right, in Vietnam. Yeah, so the star of that gets embroiled in a money lending thing, and kind of the company is about to be shut down, and he pays back the money that the company owes, to this enforcer, and then they end up in a bar, and they end up in a fight together, and they end up spending the night together, and it's a really the filming is beautiful, the imagery is beautiful. It can be seen as a bit of a cop-out, the film, because in a way, it would be very difficult to say whether do they just form like this very close friendship, they reveal their lives, right. They become kind of soulmates or something. The sexual element is not underlined, or it's kind of hinted at but not quite. So I think some people might have had a problem with that. I don't. And there was also a Georgian film called And Then We Danced about, this young man who falls in love with someone in a dance troupe who the dance is meant to evoke the country, so it's very macho. It's a very macho place to be, even though it's dancing. So, and that's what won the prize, and it's very, very good as well. So it was kind of, a really interesting thing to be a part of. And in fact, I'm hoping to talk to the organizers and do a podcast with them at some point. I want to find out more about, what they do, really. So
Lovely.
Yeah. So, but now we're back to Eavesdropping, and we have seen, what I think is a really interesting film. I'm curious to know what you made of it. Really.
Yes, I think it's interesting and pretty engrossing. We've seen Monos. Spoilers coming up. Spoil lots of things. So make sure you go and see it first because it's so good. Really. The trailer was fantastic, and actually the trailer was doing the rounds at around the same time as Apocalypse Now was coming out in that re-release that we saw. And the parallels just from the trailer seem quite obvious. I mean, it's a war film to some degree, and that's clear from the trailer. But also there's a kind of lost in the wilderness kind of wildness going on. And also there's just, again, from the trailer alone, a stunning kind of eye for composition and visual beauty in the film.
Whoever did the publicity did a good job because, it's a film that you were aware of, and kind of almost waiting for it to come out. And actually, I was afraid that because I've been away, I was afraid that we might have missed it, really. But no, it's still playing and very much worth seeing, I think.
It's a Colombian film. It's been produced by a whole host of international financiers, but it's a Colombian film. It's written and directed. Well, it's directed by Alejandro Landes. Written and directed by Landes and Alexis dos Santos. And it's got a cast of these 8 kids, primarily.
Yes.
So there's also a kind of a Lord of the Flies thing going on in it. And if you don't think Lord of the Flies right from the beginning, by the time they put a pig's head on a stick, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's. I got Lord of the Flies from the very beginning, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It was shot... this is if the Wikipedia's to believe, because there is a citation needed note, but the locations used, primarily, it's on a mountain and also in kind of jungles.
Yes.
This is from Wikipedia. The film was shot on location in Colombia on the Chingaza Paramo in Cundinamarca and on the jungle of the Samaná River Canyon in Antioquia. Both locations had never been caught on film due to the extreme conditions in terms of access and weather, which is although it says citation needed, completely believable.
It's
and
unbelievable.
what a joy that these locations have been filmed.
Yes.
Because it's incredible. There's one shot in particular on top of a mountain where they're above the clouds and within the clouds.
Yes.
And the mountain's all sort of silhouetted and the clouds are clear and it's incredible to look at.
I thought you were going to, like, you know, hit me in the ribs or something, because there were about 3 moments where I just couldn't stop myself from saying wow.
Yeah, right at the start.
It was just so beautiful. You know, it's I mean, one of the old-fashioned things about going to the movies was to see places that you would never otherwise see, right? And actually, I think the film, for me, fulfills that function, right? Kind of. The locations are so incredibly beautiful, and they're filmed so beautifully. So there's just like this aesthetic pleasure in seeing, you know, this place filmed like this. It's just unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah. So, roughly speaking, the film follows these 8 kids who are child soldiers in something called the organisation. You don't ever really know what the organisation is or what it's fighting for.
That's right.
Which is something that I would be critical of. I would have liked more on this. But,
yes.
they're on top of this mountain with this kind of fort. There's just like a big stone building that is the only thing around. They're occasionally visited by this adult who is a very short bloke, but he's clearly in control.
Well, let's be clear, he's not just a short bloke. I think he's a dwarf, isn't he? Or
well, I don't know. I mean, I think he is just a short bloke. I mean, he doesn't really have dwarfism.
Okay, sorry. So, well, he's a little person, though.
He's very short.
Yeah.
But sorry, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was. I mean, I don't want to make a big fuss about it, you know, but I think it's an interesting casting choice because he is a little person. I mean, he might not be. I mean, you know, I'm not well versed in the technical terms, so it might not be a dwarf, but you know, there are other conditions in which kind of people are like 3 foot tall, you know, that do not involve dwarfism, and he is somebody like that. He might be 4 foot, but you know,
yeah. It's I agree. It's like it's not something you want to make too much of. But there is something interesting to his presence, and I guess you kind of believe it. Well, I kind of thought about it in terms of maybe that's why, in the logic of the story, maybe that's why he is in charge of children, because he couldn't be in charge of adults that wouldn't take him so seriously. Maybe
perhaps
that's the way I kind of thought about it. But
perhaps, but
again, nothing is clear.
Yeah, really. You don't cast, you know, either a dwarf or a little person without a reason. Like, you know, it's a very striking image that he presents sometimes, because, you know, he's not only like a little person, but he's like completely built like a bodybuilder.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So he's ripped. Yeah, so just kind
There's
of
a very striking aspect to the way he looks and the way he acts, and he is in charge of. I mean, everyone else is taller than him. These are kids up between like 14 and 18, so these aren't young kids. These are in their teens. But you know, nonetheless, they also probably couldn't get the best of him in a fight because, as you say, the guy is built.
Yes.
One of the interesting things that he does is because right at the start of the film, I was probably expecting it to be harsher than it was, which I think it becomes a little bit later. But I was expecting it to be really about the kind of the situation that these kids are in, being completely unsuited to them, being inhumane and that sort of thing. And it is, but they're not fighting a war right at the start. They have been tasked with keeping an American captive. This doctor, played by Julianne Nicholson, who I weirdly recognise. Well, I don't recognise. Who I weirdly only know her as the bookie in Snatch. Very bizarre. Anyway, she's very good. And the interesting thing is when the leader comes around, the adult this is, you know, he trains them and he keeps them in line, and he does the weird thing where he allows them to set up, well, in the English subtitles it's partnerships, but I was listening as much as I could to the Spanish that they were speaking, and I think the word used was matrimonios.
Yeah, I mean, the translation is very sly, actually, because there are two incidents. So one, you know, when they say a partnership, I think initially it's come together, but then afterwards they do say the word matrimonio, which means marriage. Yeah, you're kind of partnered up formally. But there's a lot of homophobic language throughout.
Right.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of maricones, maricas, yeah, faggots, blah. And
that's not there at all.
That's not there at all.
That's the first I've... No,
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so it
Right.
is there. And I'm sorry that they've done that, actually, because, the film is so interesting about, kind of elements of sex and sexuality and gender, and, it shows so fluid. There are so many types of young people there, and, you have these two men kissing, and then you have these two women kissing, and you have a young man who is kind of transy, yeah, the guy who shoots the cow.
Dog.
So the film is so woke in a way about these issues, and it's the older authoritarian figure who keeps calling them faggots when they're not doing the exercises properly and so on.
Right.
It is kind of like standard army issue, so to speak. But it's a pity that the subtitles are racist.
Yeah, they didn't reflect that at all.
Yeah.
And there was another weird, I think, minor thing with the subtitles. Was that the one of the two girls that kiss, one of them's called Rambo. And I was throughout the whole film, I didn't know whether she was a boy or a girl. She's very androgynous.
Yes, exactly.
And keeps her hair very short as well, which and you can't really tell from the voice either, which I thought was interesting. And then there's one point where someone says, and then this is the English subtitles, he's a crybaby. And it was he in the subtitles. And I picked up on that because I was looking for clues at any point. Is this a boy or a girl? I was sort of curious. And then in the credits, I noted that the character played by an actress named Sofia Buenaventura. So I don't know if that was a mistranslation in the subtitles. I
don't know, but I think that ambiguity is deliberate.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it's one of the things that makes the film so interesting. So I'm not sure that what you said about wanting to know more is, well, obviously it's an issue for you, but I'm saying, this is the type of film where you think everything is quite deliberate. So if you're not given more information, the question to ask is, why aren't you?
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't come out of it thinking it was a mistake that I didn't know details about what this organisation was, for instance, kind of what how the kids got into it, anything like that. It didn't appear to be a mistake. But I think then, the fact that it's deliberate to me says the film is going for something more allegorical.
Exactly.
About human nature. Yeah, and again, I think that speaks to something like Lord of the Flies, which is really about that too. It's a very clear allegory in Lord of the Flies.
Yes. But not just about human nature. I think actually about American culture. So it's very interesting that the first words you hear in the film are Rambo and Smurf.
Yeah, that's true. That's two of the characters' names.
Yeah. So...
Yeah, and they're American characters.
And one girl dreams of being taken away and dancing on a television show, right? Yeah.
Although it wasn't clear to me if she was playing the doctor when she said that.
I don't know, because you get the feeling that these children have been taken out of somewhere and put there, right? And actually, I think one of them at one point says, if you escape, it'll mean like we've been suffering this cold for nothing, right? So, this is a life of privation for them, and they are children. They have been taken from somewhere, or joined up for some reason, or you can imagine all kinds of things. They're to pay a family debt, or they've been coerced by the local mafia, or whatever, right? Like they are in this fortress, in nowhere, like one of the hardest places to get to, and they're guarding, an American woman doctor. Yeah. So kind of what's she doing there? How did they get there? Why have they chosen to guard? All you see repeatedly is that this woman reads, the paper to demonstrate that she's alive, but who is she reading it to? Yeah, I think all of that is...
Yeah, because they film her, so clearly these tapes are going to go somewhere, but you don't know any of that.
Yeah, and then I think there's a really kind of interesting moment where, the American woman has been treated quite respectfully, right? And she makes various attempts to escape. And then, they make it sound like, putting a chain around her so that she doesn't escape is the worst violation you can possibly do, or yeah. And then there's a moment where actually this woman kills 2 other people. Yeah, you know, so that kind of changes everything around, right? Kind of, you know.
Did she kill 2? Who else did
Yes, she kills. She
girl
strangles the young girl, and drowns her, and then she shoots the other person who was there guarding. I think it's 2. The young boy appears and she shoots him.
Which young boy?
When she's coming out of the maybe I'm...
No, I think no. She then puts her clothes on and escapes, and the kid's tied up still.
Yes.
She doesn't. I think she only kills the one girl. The other person who dies is the leader, who's shot by Bigfoot.
Right.
And obviously Wolf dies at the start.
Right. Okay. I
think she only shot the one. Killed the one, rather.
Anyway, it's quite brutal.
But yes, she kills someone.
So I thought that was interesting, right? So is it saying something about, you know, American culture, American intervention in Latin America? Yeah, kind of. You're not too clear on that, really. So the film is really focusing on the interrelationships of all of these people, but it is in an allegorical kind of setting where children are soldiers. There's a lot of different factions kind of appearing, which I wonder if it has anything to do with Colombian history. There's that scene where the androgynous girl, is it
Rambo?
Rambo finds shelter with his family, right? And then the mother and the father instantly get killed, and the camera lingers on the faces of the children who had been hiding under a sofa or something.
Under a table.
Under a table. So, you know, are you meant to kind of make a relation between these children and the children who are now killing people, right?
There was an image that spoke to me overall, which was an image that came right towards the end of the film, which is, it's just about where Rambo's finally escaped. She's kind of had this, she's not really been sure all along, I suppose, and she's found it within herself to run away. And it's right at the end of the film, there's a helicopter shot of a couple of rivers next to each other, and one is very dirty, it's full of sludge and soil and sediment, and the other is clean.
Yes,
and they meet, and the clean river dies at that point. It's taken over by the dirty one, and it's an image that says, you know, you can't stay clean for long. The moment you come in contact with something dirty, it takes you over. And that kind of, like, there's a whole thing in this film about that children are theoretically innocent. It's like, the thing is, weirdly, that they're only really kind of regimented and training when that leader's there. When he's not there, they're playing.
Yes.
And they're also, they're kids, they're growing up, and they're having romantic encounters and sexual encounters.
Yes.
You know, they're being kids.
Yes. And they're being very good kids because they ask permission for things.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're real Generation Zers, aren't they? Like they're no irony in them. They're all sincere and but then you also got the Doctor, who one assumes, you can't assume too much, I suppose, but I kind of took it as she's there for humanitarian purposes, or would have been initially.
Oh no, I didn't.
That's how I took it.
I didn't, because I think there's at one point they also refer to an engineer. One of the broadcasts as a missing engineer or something. Right. So I don't take that for granted at all.
Okay. Well, either way, she's a doctor, and doctors theoretically are doing good things. And as you say, she ends up brutally killing a child.
Yes.
You know, again, she can't stay clean in the world that she's in now. And that's that. And then the thing with Rambo escapes. And the final shots of the film are of her on a helicopter, an army helicopter, having been picked up, and they're flying into the city, and you hear the commander or whatever on the helicopter saying, what we're going to do with her, what happens next, and she looks pretty terrified, and the camera cuts to black, and you know what's happened. She's grown up in a sort of army, and where she wind up after she escapes? With another army.
Yes.
You know, like there's no escape.
There's no escape. Yeah.
Once dirty, always dirty, and that's what that river says.
But I registered that as well, and kind of such a deliberate and striking image and I was trying to make sense of it, but actually I think you did it better than I could have, really, because you can see that strand kind of throughout the rest of the film.
The only real true innocents in the whole thing are the family that Rambo takes refuge with, and you end up with the mother and dad dying, the kids without parents, possibly being shot. That's left ambiguous, because they're discovered by Lady.
Yeah.
So you have no idea what she did.
Exactly, and there's a very portentous close-up on her face, right? But it is kind of, children killing parents, leaving other children orphaned. Yeah, it's kind of...
at best.
At best.
Yeah.
So it's a very striking film, and it was very kind of interesting and beautiful to watch. I was wondering, what's it all about? Why are you seeing this? I kind of, some things were kind of very clear, but some things were not. Yeah, kind of. So there was some narrative information that like you, I would have liked to have had. Who is that woman that is being imprisoned? Why is she being imprisoned? What's the deadline for her release? Right? Because there are these things that are suggested. So, there's a conversation that she has where she wants to ask a question and can't ask a question. You imagine that maybe someone is tricking her, thinking, that she's talking to her husband, and where it could be somebody else. But it's a very interesting thing. And actually, I think there are other things maybe about, globalization and chaos and nature and the city that I'm not kind of quite making sense yet. So, for example, I was very struck that these children are in some of the, the highest altitude mountains and, these virgin forests and, so like there is this thing about nature, but often they have like tattoos or nose rings or lip rings or piercings, kind of, it's almost like a kind of, I don't know, an urban street culture, but kind of transplanted into this, wilderness, really. And the wilderness is seen as being beautiful, but also deadly, or forbidding or harsh, right? Kind of, you're shown that they're living a very hard life amidst, kind of this natural beauty, right? And also that there's a fortified element to that life, right? Like what you see is this immense fort, don't you?
On the top of the mountain.
On top of the mountain.
Yeah, it's a vast sort of... Well, it's huge, but it's just this one big square building.
That's right.
In amongst all this, kind of organic beauty.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, but they entered through a hole in the ground, and so it's almost like they're, I don't know, rats or ferrets, or they're they're living in this kind of splendid place, but it is also a place of nature and a place of war or defense, or it's very tantalizing, it's kind of suggestive imagery, but again, kind of.
Well, there's a kind of brutality to their way of life in some respects. So you see butchering the cow for one thing. It's well, I mean, clearly they're butchering a real cow.
The cow is called Shakira.
Yeah, that's right. The cow's called Shakira.
Well, I think it's Colombian, isn't she?
She is, yeah.
Yeah.
But there are these things about kind of the way they live. It's always very muddy and that kind of thing, and there's a harshness to it. But again, kind of what I was saying about the start of the film being not what I expected is there's a surprising amount of tenderness to it. I think, so like those relationships that are struck up between characters are sort of real romantic relationships, and these are kids, kind of feeling their way through their feelings.
They quickly become power relations, though.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think they're all of those things, but they're really all closed down by authority and hierarchy, and
Yeah, but I suppose
it's a society that sets its own very harsh rules. So if you deviate from it, right, kind of, you're tied to a tree.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, but then to return to that Lord of the Flies kind of parallel I was drawing. It's something that the film, I think, descends into, so as power leaves and as things start getting out of hand, so they kill this cow which is on loan from someone. That's a very, very bad thing, and that's an accidental death. And then the leader, Wolf, kills himself because I guess you don't exactly know why, but the feeling is he just feels very isolated and he's going to be sort of strung up for this because he's in charge.
I mean, the reason why he kills himself is because the way that the cow was set up is, you know, kind of this cow is just as important as your prisoner.
Yeah.
You know, it's not only will provide you with milk, but we have to return it intact, because if we don't return it intact, we'll be able to kind of get nothing else from these people. So it's set up as like a very precious thing. And he knows that, you know, once they find out that the cow, which has been his responsibility, no longer exists, he will be punished for it. So that's why he kills himself.
So he kills himself.
The alternative will be worse,
and
it suggests.
And Bigfoot, who is kind of a wild kid. And actually, I should quickly... Apparently he was in Hannah Montana. Moises Araya. American Colombian, but he was in Hannah Montana.
Right.
Who knew?
Okay.
Well, I've never seen Hannah Montana, but Christ knows he's intimidating in this. So imagine what he must have been like in that. And he's given command, and it's under him that he starts to sort of take things into his own hands a little bit. That's when they sort of escape into the jungle, and then and it's once they're in the jungle that things start becoming really, Lord of the Flies-ish, and sort of the group starts becoming very disjointed. I mean, it's not really a cohesive whole at the beginning either, but certainly towards the end, they are much more liberal with kind of punishing people for things, doing things off their own bats, that sort of thing. They're much less of a unit as the film goes on.
I think what you said about Hannah Montana is so interesting because, you know, one of the things that you see kind of all these teenagers, right? And, you know, they're breakdancing and, you know, kind of they're playing games and so on. And they're very powerful and they're very athletic. And, you know, kind of one of the things that fascinated me was, you know, one of them does this backflip or back and forth flip with their body. And I think it's so interesting because, you know, the body's clearly powerful and agile, yet it doesn't evoke that because it doesn't fit into the stereotype of a good body that we now have, which is to be really ripped. And it's so interesting that the only person who has like that American type of ripped body is the guy who was in Hannah Montana.
Yeah, I think probably Wolf had it as well. He dies early on.
Not like that. No, I mean this is a really ripped kind of gym body. Yeah,
that's true. Bigfoot does have that. Yeah. Were you surprised at certain things? So you kind of jumped when the short fella, the leader, the adult, was shot.
Yes, I didn't expect that.
I expected that the moment they got on the boat.
Yeah, well,
and especially when you saw Bigfoot had a gun.
Yes,
you know.
I think it's so interesting because the film begins by saying we are a family, right? You know, and I'm a father. You know, and I'm going to be like a father to you, and so on. And of course, you know, this kind of like gets unraveled, and you have all these brutalities and power relations and coercions and so on. But it's very interesting at that moment because, you know, Bigfoot has a gun.
Yeah. So
he's been given a gun, right? They obviously have to be on guard in this river against opposing factions, which you never really see. But clearly this is society in which everyone is on guard against gun violence. They all have guns, and every time somebody approaches, right, like the gun comes out, like with that family, right? Because, you know, so it's kind of, I don't know, a real condemnation of the culture, really. And it's interesting that it begins in, you know, the peak of this mountain, or, you know, above the clouds, you know, and it ends with this military helicopter going into the city, right? Kind of, you know, so you have the feeling that like everything is militarized in one way or another. Yeah, that kind of everyone's in danger, and kind of, you know, it's a war culture.
Yeah. Yeah, no matter how civilized.
Well, we don't see much civilization.
No,
really.
You see a shot of a city at the end.
Yeah, and you see like this kind
I thought the family, you know, the moment that Rambo winds up with that family and they feed him, and take her in. I was thinking, what are they doing here? Like, they need to know that these kids are out there and that these families need to be protected. I didn't think they definitely would die. I didn't think that straight away, but I just thought they're in trouble, you know.
It was very interesting because the shots are all shots of the quotidian and of home. You know, they eat, and the mother reminds the kids of their manners, not to eat so quickly. You have shots of the kids playing in the garden, you know, shots of sitting on the porch.
But no space for a guest.
Yeah, and so on. So actually it's a very homey, familial space. Yet as soon as they hear noises of an intruder, the guns come out.
Yeah, that's true. They have guns
right?
as well.
So, it gives this impression that the whole culture is on some type of war footing. You know?
Yeah. I want to say a word about the soundtrack as well. The score in particular. The score was by, give me one moment, Micah Levi, known by her stage name Mikachu. She's English apparently. There's one particular sort of, I don't know if it's the same track, but there is a type of music that occurs in a couple of campfire scenes where there are these kind of sort of atonal drones over the music that speak to a kind of a madness or a dread that I thought, I mean, they kind of, it's that thing of really generating a feeling. Like, even if you didn't know exactly what the film is trying to say, maybe, even if it is trying to say something very specific, you know, whether it is or not, it's generating a feeling of madness and dread, and there's a kind of dreamlike imagery to it, and those are some of the parts that made me think more of Apocalypse Now, you know, which I think is in there. And I think also the scene where the kids, this is under Bigfoot's command at this point in the jungle, paint themselves in camouflage. So some of them are in this kind of blue war paint all over, like woad, and the others are spat themselves with mud so they can hide in the mud. And then at night they come out and they're stalking around these cars that they're kind of looting or whatever. And there's one shot in particular. It's where Rambo is trying to free Smurf, the little kid who's been tied up at this point. She's trying to free him and get away with him, and I think Bigfoot shows up and stares. No, that's wrong. That's Lady. But the Bigfoot shot is a different time. But the Bigfoot shot I'm thinking of is of him in this blue war paint, and he looks. It has an element of that bit towards the end of Apocalypse Now, where Marlon Brando is covered in camouflage paint, you know, and looks mad. But also it has, like, this will sound crass, but it looks like Nightcrawler in X-Men, if you remember, and there's something really demonic about that look. Yes. You know, he looks like an imp, like a demon in this, which is something else. You know, that's not quite the same, and it's something really quite scary. You know, and really speaks to kind of what this kid is capable of. You know, he really is kind of untethered. And I suppose also has that element of, like, when you're behind a mask, you can be freer to do things. Like, he's dangerous. Yes. You know, and that was a really creepy look.
So, I think it's kind of like a magical film in a way, because I feel it's one of those films that I can't quite come to grips with at the moment, right? That I feel that there's more to think about, really. But that I found entrancing and beautiful, right? And kind of, it moved really well, you know, and the action kind of worked on me, right? And yet I feel that there's kind of connections and meanings and so on that I'm not quite bringing together yet.
Well, I wonder whether after kind of all the dust settles, it's kind of allegorical or a kind of thematic substance matches the kind of moment-to-moment experience of watching it, which I think is, as you say, entrancing and beautiful and weird and makes me ask all these questions. But kind of like I say, once all that settles, I wonder whether it is really actually very meaty.
Yes.
Or saying something...
I don't know, but I think it's worth underlining and appreciating the fact that this film, that does feel allegorical from the beginning, is nonetheless so entrancing and exciting to watch. Yeah, that kind of, it just moves so well, and it's kind of so beautiful, and so it's an interesting film that you're not quite grounded, or you're never completely sure of what's going on. Yeah, you always think that something is escaping you, right, or something, and yet actually that you don't mind. Yeah, that kind of that it's acting on you. It's so beautiful to look at. It's acting on you in such interesting ways, and it's flowing so well that you just kind of go with it, and you think, I'll think about it later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to emphasise how beautiful it is to look at, especially early on when you're on top of that mountain, and also very early on in the campfire sort of dance scene early on, where you've got this one fire that is the source of all the light because it's at night, and the music's doing that thing, and you've got Lady and Wolf kissing, and their hair, hers especially, is lit up from behind by these flames.
Yes.
It looks incredible. That is that painting with light.
Yes.
And there are shots, of the there are kind of these landscape shots of these silhouetted figures, and it's the landscape in the background, the sky and the clouds, whatever, and the sunsets that bring in all these beautiful, rich kind of light
tones.
Yeah.
There's also something racial so it has to be important that the prisoner is like this white Irish looking kind of person, right? And there's that moment where the girls in the group say, let us braid your hair, and they do kind of like this very traditional kind of braided hair with a part in the middle and a design, right? So I think there are things there. I maybe just don't have the cultural references to kind of, tie them all together as neatly as I'd like. Or maybe they're not meant to be tied in so neatly, but that there are things there. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it kind of occurred to me that there are a couple of characters in the group, and I would say probably of the this is true of the leader, the adult, the short fella as well. There's a kind of indigenous look to them. And then it makes me think of Roma, which, we talked about that being a Mexican film that shows indigenous Mexican people, which I guess until you see it, you don't think about how rare that is. And so that's something that kind of occurred to me here, that there is a mix of people, including apparently indigenous.
It's a very good point, because you see some people that look like indigenous people, some people that actually look, Afro-Colombian or whatever, right? That kind of, are of African descent to some degree. You see kind of people who are a mixture of European and, indigenous. And then also some of the characters look very white European, right?
Yeah.
Dark-haired and dark-eyed, as opposed to, the prisoner. He was freckled and fair-haired and, I forget what color her eyes are, but blue-green or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think the mix of people is an interesting one.
Yeah.
And again, I imagine very deliberate, right? Because, you could have done it differently. Right?
Yeah.
So all of those things are kind of things to think about. Yeah. So in a way, if we're saying, well, the film is an allegory. Well, what is it allegorizing? What is it saying? And in a way, I'm not too sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't mind.
No, nor do I. It was a fantastic experience to see it, and I'm really glad we did.
Yes. And actually, it's a film that I really now would like to go and read some of the reviews, or indeed the press package, which, I will ask for, actually, and see if that kind of,
elucidates.
Yes, offers a guide. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but in the meantime, I would highly recommend that people go see it, right? Like, we didn't know anything about it going in, and as I said, even though you can't kind of bring in all of the pieces together, it was a really terrific kind of experience to see something kind of, so beautiful, and in some ways so cohesive. Yeah, that kind of moved so well.
Yeah, like it in some respects there are vignettes or vignette aspect to it. Some scenes are actually quite self-contained, I think, but even then, it is tonally and kind of thematically feels very cohesive. And at no point did I think anything was kind of out of place. I think it's a really beautifully put together and kind of overall sort of controlled piece
Some
of
of the scenes are amazing, like, you know, the kids being chased and just being, you know, in the flow of that water. Yeah, like, you know...
the raging torrent.
The raging torrent, yeah. I mean, just these heads kind of bobbing, and actually the camera work on that is absolutely amazing. The fact that it's all in focus on the heads, you know, it's really superb.
Yeah.
So it's kind of... I think there are images in it that I've never seen before, and, you know, there are images that are as beautiful as anything I've ever seen in cinema.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful.
I recommend you see it.
Highly recommended. Yeah, get to a cinema and see it if you can, because it's fantastic.
All right, well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify.
Yes, we mustn't forget Spotify.
The new one.
Yeah.
The social media is still Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.